Hello, and welcome to the Plan Initiatives podcast series, where we talk with people about the innovative work they're doing to increase the respectful treatment of plants. My name is Sue Fager. I'm a Plan Initiative board member, and today we are talking with Grant Wilson, the Executive Director of Earth Law Center. Grant is an expert on the rights of nature, ecocentric law, and international environmental law. The Earth Law Center is also the recipient of several grants from the Plant Initiative. Grant, welcome to the podcast. It's such a pleasure to speak with you.
Great to be here, and thank you for the support and the kind introduction.
So tell us a little bit about the Earth Law Center and your work there.
Sure. Earth Law Center is a nonprofit, and we work all over the world to advance this dream of reimagining the law with nature at its core. And that's very different than our current legal system, which by and large is almost entirely anthropocentric or human-centered. It's concerned with human welfare, human rights, human economic benefits, and so forth. And, these are all great things for humans, but what's not included in the law is the voice of nature, including plants, by and large. And so we work to advance the rights of nature, the rights of certain species, the idea that future generations should have rights, and a bunch of other innovative legal movements for the planet. And we put these into place and show that they can work and practice, and hopefully put out templates and models so others can do the same type of work that we're doing.
How did you come to work at the Earth Law Center? What was your journey to get there?
My journey was always looking for what was on the most cutting edge of the environmental legal movement. A lot of my earlier work as an environmentalist was either seeing the destruction of wolf habitat and the extirpation of wolves from certain places, and hoping they could return to the lands from which they were removed, and also seeing huge harms to entire peoples from climate change, working to defend the interests of island nations at climate change negotiations, which I got to do as a young law student. And between my work with keystone species and predators, and seeing kind of this humans versus nature mindset in a lot of people that I thought just didn't make any sense, whether from a cultural or legal perspective, and then also seeing just the existential threat faced by entire peoples by climate change, as well as entire ecosystems, I kind of was gravitating towards what are the legal solutions that really get to root causes of environmental declines. Not stuff that's going to delay the inevitable, not stuff that's putting a Band-Aid on, but stuff that's really a root cause. And pretty quickly, when you start looking at the root cause of the environmental crisis, it's hard to avoid the treatment of all of nature as a resource or as a piece of property. And so I was delighted to find Earth Law Center in 2013, right after I graduated law school. I was one of the first people to go right from law school into a career to defend the rights of nature. And it just fit with what I really believed in, even though I hadn't known the movement previously. And I've desperately held on ever since then to this dream of what I think is the coolest thing ever, which is as a career getting to basically defend the voice and rights of the planet.
Thank you. I think before we go much further, it'd be helpful to define the rights of nature and tell us why you think they're so important.
The rights of nature is a legal movement to recognize that nature has rights just like humans do. And simply put, it could be personhood, which just means nature would be defined as a person under the law. It could include standing for nature in a court. Nature can actually go into a court and defend its rights. It could actually also include what I call voice of nature, the idea of let's give nature a voice, such as through legal guardians. But all of it ultimately goes back, at least in many jurisdictions, to this idea of nature having rights. And it's important because, without rights, you're a thing. There's kind of two options in most legal systems. You have rights, and you're oftentimes a person, you call it, if you have rights, or you're a thing. And, we know from history, the horrific treatment we give to, quote, things. And, there's a whole history of rights, and specifically entities that did not have rights. Women were considered the property of their husbands.
Mhm.
Obviously, many people have been enslaved. Indigenous peoples in North America were not treated as citizens. And, when we go back and look at the treatment of entities that are not persons, don't have rights, it's horrific. They don't have a voice. There's no justice for them. And, we've corrected some of those harms and are still learning how to do better. But for nature, we've got nowhere close to a legal revolution that recognizes its rights and its voice. And until we do so, we're just going to continue to treat the planet as a commodity and take from it with some recourse, but not enough to reverse course.
Why do you think that working for the rights of nature is such a promising approach?
I think it is a promising approach. I should also say that I think there's other promising approaches as well. In
Well, you
fact,
can elaborate on those as well.
okay, cool. Well, at Earth Law Center, as I mentioned early on, we're all about, what does a legal system with nature at its core look like? And certainly rights of nature is a big part of that. And, when you think about how it works in practice, basically there's a new rights holder in the room, and you have to consider its interests in all elements of society and the economic system and so forth. So, for example, if there's a big proposal for a mining project, and you want to go and go into the middle of the Amazon and engage in a bunch of extraction, in the earliest stages before you do that, you not only have to consider human environmental interests as you normally would, but also what about the interests of the rainforests, the trees, the frogs, the river, and make that an integral part of your planning and the review process as to whether or not you should move forward with this project. There's actually cases in Ecuador where that happens. They go to the courts and they say, look, this gas and oil company, this mining company, this happened with Los Cedros, is coming in, and the court says you need to consider the rights and the interests of the cloud forest, all the species within, the larger interconnected health of these entire systems. And if you don't do that, you can't engage in extraction here. So that's a paradigm shift. The idea of nature having a voice in the courts is a paradigm shift. And then if you pull this concept of rights of nature out and expand it to other areas, you could think of corporate governance, nature having a voice in corporations. You can think of family law, treating, ecosystems or plants or a species as a member of your family. And what does that look like? You can all of a sudden pull it into all these other areas of the law, which really dictate how we approach our society. Some of the other movements that are interesting are this idea of inherent relationships, which is an indigenous concept, understanding that indigenous peoples have inherent relationships with sacred lands and waters, and how do you protect those through innovative legal movements? So it's kind of outside of the confines of rights altogether. There's movements to criminalize ecocide, make ecocide a crime. So, a widespread harm against the environment could be considered an international crime. So think of the destruction of the Amazon, let's say. There's movements to recognize that future generations should have rights. Currently, they have no voice in the legal system. And then there's all sorts of kind of innovative spaces bubbling up right now, like democratic processes for nature, let's say. And that's actually to get back to, plants, something that's interesting for plants. Could plants vote? How would they vote? Could plants have a representative or a guardian that speaks for them? Could you measure some sort of chemical level in the plants that determines whether or not they like something, and that can be a vote? There's someone named Jonathan Keats who's exploring a lot of these ideas, including through his Earth Law Center affiliation. So, rights of nature and some of these other movements are kind of just the tip of the iceberg. And then you can really look into all facets of how our society works and think about how do you give a voice to the natural world. And that's very exciting.
Those are all incredible, Grant, and it's exciting to hear you talk about them. What about the Earth Law portal? Tell us a little bit about that. How did it come about? How are people using it?
Yeah, the Earth Law portal is a site created to make it really easy for anybody to produce a legal template that gives rights or a voice to nature, as well as other areas of the law that are ecocentric, and also to have tools to put that into place and practice. So it's kind of like if you've used LegalZoom or Rocket Lawyer to like create a draft contract to rent a house or something simple like that. You go online, you put in your name and your birthday and what's the address of the house, and click produce, and you get a cool legal document at the end, and you both sign it and you have your new house, and that's great. And so we kind of thought, what if it was that simple for really cutting edge legal models for the planet to be produced and for advocates to have access to those? And then what if we brought in all our partners and friends who had really cool models and templates, and put them in one place and kept them updated to make sure they're fresh. So we launched this Earth Law portal last year, and it's really great, earthlawportal.org. And go on there and poke around and see what you find on the rights of nature, animal rights. There's a whole indigenous Earth Law portal. And then there's all sorts of resources and journals and videos. So it's a great place if you're interested in kind of the law and policy side and don't know where to start and need some guidance. So that's awesome. And we've had a really positive feedback. A couple of things to note is that, one, we're looking for partners and friends. So if you have a kind of ecocentric law or governance model, you've worked it out such that, plants can have their voice heard in city council. And here's how it's going to happen. There's some guardians for the plants, and it's the traditional people who spoke for that plant. And you have something written, reach out. We'd love to highlight your model. We put our partners' logos on all the models to promote their own work and direct traffic to their websites and projects. And then the other thing to note is that we're working on some updates in different spaces, and one of those spaces is plant personhood. So this year we'll be producing a couple models about how plant personhood works. How can you put it into effect in your community or a local government? What are the limitations? What are some of the options? And so that's going to be really exciting. So if you have any thoughts about that as well, we're working on these, just reach out to Earth Law Center.
Excellent. Thank you. Are there some particularly interesting success stories that the Earth Law Center has had in its work to advance the rights of nature?
Definitely. And I will say the first, I've been at Earth Law Center about 11 years now. As I said, I came kind of right out of law school. And, the first 5 or 6 years, there's a lot of theory, a lot of like pushing things that, maybe didn't have the political will to get done. A lot of just dreaming, but not fulfilling this full vision that we have. The last 5 years, 4 or 5 years, have just been a total game changer. And I think that says something about the planet, that governments are ready for kind of this new generation of laws to be put into place. There's a greater understanding that the status quo, treating nature as property, isn't working. And so, yeah, the last 4 or 5 years, we've had all these awesome victories, and a lot of our partners and friends have had great victories. We've collaborated on a lot of them. Just maybe one to note that just happened last week, so this is almost breaking news, is that there was a big court decision in Peru to declare legal rights for the Marañón River. And this is a case that Earth Law Center and our partners such as International Rivers and others have been working on for many years, providing support to indigenous women's groups in Peru, who were, really the leaders of this campaign, including the Cucama Women's Federation. And after years and years of fighting, this court ruling came out that says the Marañón River has rights, and it also committed to give it a voice in the law by appointing legal guardians, including these, indigenous women river defenders, the people from the Cucama Women's Federation and others who are traditional stewards and guardians of this river, who have long given it a voice before its formal rights were recognized. So the court's like, okay, these are like great people to serve as its legal guardians, just like a child might have a guardian. And so the court ordered the rights of the river, the guardianship of the river, and they, one of the problems in this river was all these oil spills from a pipeline going through there. And so they ordered the company operating that pipeline to, kind of go back to the drawing board on its management plan and to consider the rights of this river in how it managed this oil transport. And it's the first rights of rivers, rights of nature win at that level in Peru, and we just think it's going to plant a seed for something, really special in that region.
So I know you do a lot of work in Latin America, and just hearing about this story and looking on your website and seeing other stories about the amazing victories you've had, I'm just thinking about, would that ever happen in this country where a court would say, yes, this river has rights? And I think about what happened in South Dakota, I believe, where they wanted to run a pipeline
Right,
under a lake that was considered sacred.
right.
Not sure what the outcome is to that yet. But do you see, or maybe a better question, Grant, would be what needs to happen in this country for that kind of environmental protection, legal protection to happen?
Yeah. The kind of the blueprint for a rights of nature or ecocentric law legal system here is starting to bubble up. It bubbles up and then it gets swatted down a little bit and then it bubbles up is kind of how it's been going. So, in fact, there are dozens of communities that have passed laws acknowledging nature's rights. Some of those pushed a little too hard and got swatted down in the courts. There is a lot of precedent of tribal nations recognizing the rights
Mhm.
of nature, including to oppose an oil pipeline with the rights of Manoomin, where they took that case, this idea that this wild rice or Manoomin should be recognized as sacred in the law and therefore has some sort of rights or personhood. And this idea was taken all the way to court and got very far. And the courts kind of recognized and said, yeah, you as you can recognize the rights of Manoomin, but the problem was that it was applied off the reservation of the Ojibwe people that had passed the law, and there's some you get into some federal sovereign Indian nation issues about
Mhm.
where apply these issues as off the reservation or not. And but the bottom line there is that courts have kind of already recognized, both tribal courts and non-tribal courts, that if tribal nations want to acknowledge rights for nature or personhood, it seems like that's on the table. And so there's a lot of possibility there. And there's a great law journal article called something like Tribal Nations Laboratories for the Rights of Nature, which is a play off of this idea that states are laboratories for federal law. And there's a lot of leadership happening there. That being said, and I'll get back to your main point in just a second, but that being said, some tribal nations are not so interested in the rights-based approaches at all and are more about relationships and reciprocity and more organically indigenous ideas. But elsewhere in the U.S., there's actually another big win in Nederland, Colorado, in the mountains, kind of near Boulder, where they appointed legal guardians to speak on behalf of Boulder Creek and its watershed. And that was really exciting. So now the watershed literally has a voice in local government. And that was a project that was spearheaded by a group called Save the World's Rivers. And the Earth Law Center provided a little support. But there's two guardians now who speak for the watershed. So actually, one issue that's kind of being debated now is, look, can local communities pass rights of nature laws? Like, we're pretty sure tribal nations, like, good to go. They're sovereign
Mhm.
nations, totally. Local communities, like, maybe you can do some rights of nature stuff, but if it's too aggressive, you get swatted down. But what about just giving nature a voice and having it appear in government and have its voice heard? And what does that look like? It's a little softer, and I think that can really stick in the United States. So that's a big part of our campaign and strategy. And then lastly, there's people at the state level are starting to look at this issue. If we got one state to adopt the rights of nature, it would be a game changer. Four states have opposed it now, so which actually I think is a good sign that one will step up and support it. I think the attention shows that there's some strong interest there, and so that's another place we're looking. All of which is to say, this stuff's happening. It's being debated at the community level in the courts. Sovereign tribal nations are exploring it, and it's getting more and more attention. And I think it's a matter of time before there's some more breakthroughs here.
Excellent. So I just have a follow-up question. How did they pick the two people who would speak for the Creek? Do you
In this,
know?
yeah, in this case, it was, two respected members of the community who were appointed by an environmental board, basically. And
Okay.
one was a lawyer and one was a scientist, and they both had time and had a strong connection to the ecosystem. Um, in other cases, I really support basically traditional stewards, members of the community who, again, have a long history or cultural identity of protecting an ecosystem. Other places that, that like government will try to get seats to speak as nature as guardians. That's a thing that's happened in a number of places, and I think they have to kind of move away from that. But it's really a power issue of trying to, maintain some
Hmm.
power in this new framework. But yeah, the Netherlands Guardians, I'm overdue to get their update of how it's been speaking for the watershed. I'm sure they've been releasing some information. It's going to be fascinating, and I think anyone who has the chance to speak for an ecosystem, it's just valuable to give it a shot.
Okay. And my next question is a follow along to that. And we've been kind of talking about it already, but I think the average person might think about everything that's happening on the planet right now and want to do something to try and make a difference, but it just seems so overwhelming. So, what can an individual or community group do to advance the rights of nature?
Yeah. I think the most important thing that anyone can do is to have a group discussion, and just to talk about it. So some easy ways just to talk about it as a community or to write an op-ed to your newspaper. Um, and you can see what other op-eds people have written. I hereby get permission to copy any op-ed I've done and take what you want from it and make it your own. So just see what other people have done in op-eds, put that out there. I think little community events or gatherings are a great way. Like a lot of towns have little environmental groups or citizens groups, or maybe there's a Sierra Club chapter, and to have just like one day dedicated to the rights of nature is really easy. And oftentimes you can get a speaker with some experience to come in. I do that all the time. If you're a student, have the conversation at your school. I live in a town with this great college called Fort Lewis, and we host a lot of interns there. And some of them have been going around talking to staff and administrators about, hey, what if we gave, nature or the mesa where the school is, a voice somehow? And they've had just some really interesting conversations and spread awareness. And I know that's a conversation that's now going to be happening up at the school. So that's cool. So just knock on some doors and talk to people. And then if you want to take it to the next level, check out a site like the Earth Law portal, reach out to a local group and see if there's an initiative that makes sense for your community. A lot of communities are interested in the rights of rivers, if there's a river that flows through the community. Others are interested in just the rights of nature generally. Some might be interested in, the rights of a plant, or a plant species. There's been work for rights of wild rice, as I mentioned, native corn, rights of native corn in Mexico, rights of the sacred saguaro cactus, trees, of course, standing or personhood for trees, including keystone species. So, think about what's important to your community. Think about what's kind of the heart of your community or something that everyone can rally around as an entity or natural entity or more than human life that's special to the fabric of the community. And look into a law or resolution. I guess the last thing I'll note is I often recommend, if you are going to go into the law and policy space and formally establish rights of some entity, whatever it is, a resolution, a non-binding resolution is often a good place to start. It's pretty low stakes. You're not going to end up in court about whether nature can have rights in the Constitution. And it kind of creates a community conversation and commitment to protecting the rights of nature. So it's always a great place to start. And of course, if you want to do something bigger and more grandiose and more transformative, there's people out there doing that sort of thing too. So really your imagination is the limit.
That's wonderful. I feel like those are really great places an individual or a community group could start.
Mm-hmm.
My last question, and it's another one I feel like we've been touching tangentially, and it's a question about hope.
Hmm.
And I feel like we're in a race against time. And is there enough time to save the planet? I'm going to get all emotional now. To save the planet, not just for humans, but for the creatures to whom the trees and the rocks and the rivers, etc. This is their home too. And
Yeah.
it's not just meant for humans. So, in the work that you do, what gives you hope?
Um, I feel like there's nothing about the work I do that doesn't give me hope, actually. So I could almost name anything. But you know, what comes to mind is that the quality and commitment of the people in this space is enormous. Um, the young people that are going to school and you know learning this stuff are the most talented people out there. It's the most the you know the best and the brightest want to go into this space as opposed to you know maximizing wealth through you know let's say an oil company. The talent, the dreamers, the people who can get things done. You know the most charismatic people, the best speakers, just you know, and really anyone. They're really excited about this space. And so as we see, you know, shifts in power and in politics, because you know, you're talking about the urgency of things, and a lot of that gets down to political will and power in the short term. I mean, full stop. We know that the science doesn't always determine how things go. The what's right or moral or ethical doesn't really determine how things go on a broad scale. It's a lot of it comes down to, you know, power and politics and who's in charge, who's in the room, who's the decision maker. And all those people that I see filling those positions and starting to make their way up the ladder, um, a lot of them are people who really believe in this idea that humans are part of nature and we're all interconnected. And the idea of the rights of nature 10 years ago was unheard of or laughable
Mhm.
in a law school classroom. And now it's, you know, there's entire programs being built around it. And, you know, we released a law school textbook and all the major law schools at least touch on the topic and some are creating entire programs on it. And so, you know, this kind of force of power is shifting towards this ecocentric lens, and you hate to say the young people are going to fix it, but you know at least the people coming into power who are so capable and are the type of people you'd expect to be presidents and senators are embracing this movement. We worked with a 26-year-old lawmaker in Panama, national lawmaker, Juan Diego Vasquez Gutierrez. He worked with a late 20s scientist from the Leatherback Project and lawyers at Earth Law Center who are in their late 20s or early 30s, like young people, youth, and together they created this national rights of nature law in Panama. It's been applied in a court case already. It's been extended to the rights of sea turtles through a national law protecting sea turtles. And it was all these young dreamers who were also like really smart and had cool legal models and like knew how to get stuff done. Callie Wielenturf at the Leatherback Project is just unstoppable. And so, this is that example is just a taste of what's to come in 5 or 10 years. I've personally overseen 300 students, I would say, at Earth Law Center in 5 or 10 years. A lot of them are going to be judges and corporate decision makers and lawyers and mayors, and then everyone else will be part of society and part of this chorus of people calling for a change in the status quo. And so that gives me hope. I'm starting to see it happen, and I can only imagine in another few years the power that these people are going to have as a voice for the planet.
Thank you, Grant. That
Thank
gives me
you.
hope too.
Yes.
Any last thoughts for our listeners? Anything else you'd like to share?
No, just get involved. Check out earthlawcenter.org or the Earth Law Portal at earthlawportal.org. We're always looking for collaborators and friends, and feel free to reach out.
All right, Grant, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.